Welcome to episode 159 of the Sports Geek podcast. On this week's episode, I talk big events, big partners and big content with ANZ Stadium's Greg Sleigh.
Welcome to the Sports Geek podcast, the podcast built for sports digital and sports business professionals.
And now, here's your host who is considering selling Sports Geek shoes for $495, Sean Callanan.
Thanks, DJ Joel. Yes, my name is Sean Callanan, and yes, I'm not quite ready to go big baller brand style and get the Sports Geek shoes out in the market for $495. I don't think there'll be that many takers, but you can check out at Sports Geek Shoes to see my latest pair of Sports Geek sneakers. You are listening to the Sports Geek podcast, and because I mention it on every single podcast, surely you're using Pocket Casts now, or you might be listening to it at our website at sportsgeekhq.com. Really looking forward to this this chat. I was up in Sydney just last week and went out to ANZ Stadium, recorded it at ANZ Stadium. Got a long history with ANZ Stadium. They were one of my first clients in 2010. Helped them set up their initial social strategy around using Facebook and Twitter, and a few things around their digital. And so had a good discussion with Greg, a long-time friend of the pod and a friend of mine. We actually discussed how we were both at the 2014 NRL Grand Final where we saw the Rabbitohs win. So if you want to know a little bit more about the stadium business, and I was really interested to hear Greg talk about content as the way he was describing all the different events, and that's pretty much it. We're all in the content business, and even stadium operators. So I hope you enjoy this chat I had with Greg Sleigh from ANZ Stadium. Very happy to be here at one of the famous stadiums here in Australia, a home of the Sydney Olympics way back in 2000, known as ANZ Stadium now, with the General Manager of Business Development of ANZ Stadium, Greg Sleigh. Welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, welcome to ANZ, Sean.
Well, it's somewhere I've been before. ANZ were one of the first Sports Geek clients. I remember helping ANZ secure ANZ Stadium and Twitter and getting all the social channels setting up and getting all that up and about. So, yeah, it's good to be back.
It's great. It's been a heck of a journey for us from that point of view. Probably about 2008, we probably saw you in and around playing in the social media space, and clearly it's come a long way since then.
Yeah. So first of all, give us a bit of your backstory, where you are now, and General Manager of Business, what that means, but you know what your history at the stadium.
Yeah, I've been here for about 12 years. I started in the venue management department, and it's probably a fantastic grounding to be able to work in the business of a stadium, is to spend the first 5 years of your life actually running the stadium.
Yep.
You get a bit of a feel for the nuts and bolts and actually understand what works and what doesn't. So for the past 6 years, I've been the General Manager of Business Development, and I get out of bed to secure content for the stadium under any number of different models, and then work with our hirers, our partners, to promote that content and commercialise it, and then put on the very best events we can. So, from your, when you're talking about content, who are your current partners? Who are the current tenants here at ANZ? Yeah, we've got a heap of long-term tenants, primarily through the National Rugby League. 5 clubs currently play matches out of here, namely the South Sydney Rabbitohs, Canterbury Bulldogs, the West Tigers, Parramatta Eels, and the St George Illawarra Dragons. So we this year will host 36 premiership matches through the NRL. We're also fortunate enough to host a series of West Sydney Wanderers games in the A-League, including their Sydney derbies, and then some major events. The National Rugby League State of Origin, we're the home of the grand final, the Sydney's home for the Bledisloe Cup for another 7 years. So we've got a pretty diverse event schedule of long-term tenants. It sits at about 44, 45 events a year. And then you also, on top of that, have special events, concerts, those kind of things as well? Yeah, that's. I guess that's where the cream is put on the cake. And in a year like this year, we've had a phenomenal year. We started the year with Guns N' Roses, 2 unbelievable nights of Adele at 97,000, and Justin Bieber 3 days later. So we were 5 shows in the space of about 8 weeks. We currently sit 8 internationally on the Polestar ratings for stadiums. And then we look for some other content. So we've been fortunate enough to play host to Arsenal FC for 2 matches in July in their pre-season tour. And looking forward towards the end of the year, we've got one of our favourite nights of the year with Feld Entertainment and Monster Jam, where we'll put 50,000 people in here to see the monster trucks go around in October.
And is that where you bring in the dirt, you put up the jumps and all of that?
Yeah, it's a really special night for us. I mean, we've been doing working with that on Feld for 5 years now. Bring in the dirt, bring in the big trucks, and as I say, I mean, we'll see the Colton Monster Jam that'll drag another 50-odd thousand Sydney-siders in for a big night in October.
And so, what are some of the differences from a stadium point of view from running, the regular long-term content like the Rabbitohs games and the NRL games, that kind of stuff, to having a week where you've got to roll out Adele in her box to put her in the middle of the stadium, and then she starts singing and turning around for Justin Bieber, because they're pretty diverse, different crowds. Yeah. Like, what's it from a stadium operations point of view?
I think they're both really important and clearly very different. I mean, we wouldn't be the stadium we were without our long-term tenants, and our business is predicated on the fact that we have those 44 or 45 very important event nights that we do every year. Where it becomes a little bit different, a little bit more exciting because you are doing something different is when you bring in Adele or you bring a Monster Jam in, and really it becomes a massive operational feat. To get them in. I mean, it's probably a 4 or 5 day exercise to load an event of that nature in. It's probably a 3-month exercise from a front of house point of view to actually understand what that means. I mean, Adele put 96,000 people in here 2 nights in a row. But what that brought with it was 15,000 more people in the stadium is now used to holding.
Yep.
15,000 more people than the transport systems are used to bringing into the precinct. So it was a heck of a journey with Live Nation and with Adele's management to actually sit down and go, all right, well, we're used to 83. What's it like to have 100,000 people in here? What are we going to do a little bit differently? And I think across Australia, that's where the quality of the venue managers that we're lucky enough to have out here came to the fore. In that wherever she went, she played in front of massive crowds, but reasonably well coordinated ones. People could get in on time. They got out, and they had a fantastic time while they were here.
And then, so how does something like, bringing Arsenal here for the 2 games, they played the Wanderers and Sydney FC, where does how does that business development, how does that deal come together?
Yeah. I guess my job is to make sure that we have as diverse event schedule as we can physically possibly have, because again, over the course of 50 events, we want to make sure that we're providing fantastic enjoyment for our long-term corporate suite clients, our members, as well as exposing ourselves to the greatest number of general public that we can sell tickets to. We, as an organisation 3 or 4 years ago, decided that European soccer was certainly something that the Australian public were looking to see, and one way that we could do that was actually to promote our own games.
Yep.
We were fortunate enough in 2015 to host Tottenham Hotspur and Chelsea, which was our first toe in the water for that sort of activity. And subsequent to that, Arsenal were the Premier League team who'd never been to Australia, so they were the next cab off the rank. We spent a lot of time talking to Arsenal about how they might see a tour out here go, and we ended up in a 2-year partnership with them from a tourism point of view. And it was an opportunity for us to work with Destination New South Wales, the tourism sector in New South Wales, partner with them to promote Sydney over the course of 2 years through Arsenal's assets, and that ranged from a whole heap of different social assets to game day activations with LED signage at Arsenal games. Arsenal sent legends out here to promote the tour, but also to promote tourism and things that you can do in Sydney. And it culminated in that 5-day tour that they've just undertaken in Sydney. And it was a pretty special partnership. It was something that you don't get the opportunity to do very often. And it was wonderful to see it come to fruition the way that it did in July.
Yep, and that's the thing. Speaking to guys like Chris Harris at Arsenal, is that they've got these different fan bases. They can look at their data, they can see how many Gooners there are in Australia and what they can impact there and sort of deepen their ties. But there's also that aspect of Arsenal fans will travel anywhere to go see Arsenal, and why not go to Sydney?
Well, I think Ivan Gazidi said it quite beautifully at during one of the functions while he was here, and that was, their mission is to engage globally and connect personally.
Yep.
And you see that in everything that they do. I mean, fan engagement is the buzzword for everybody in sport. They do it, they live it. And everything they did from the time that they got off the flight to the time that they said goodbye at the conclusion of the second game, I mean, their players, their delegation, Arsene himself, was all about that engagement and wanting to meet and talk to as many of their fans as they could, because they were genuinely blown away by the fact that we could put two 80,000 crowds up over the course of 3 nights, and in the middle of those 2 nights run an open training session where they got another 20,000 people to come and just see and interact.
And so was that sort of to make it almost a festival atmosphere rather than here's the game, turn up to game, it's a 2-hour thing, and then come to it, where they did their best to extend it as much as possible with the open training and other events that they did in Sydney for the time?
Yeah, I think it's all about engagement. I mean, you can't lose sight of the fact that when a team like Arsenal comes halfway across the world, they've got a couple of different motives, and the most important motive is they need to get ready for the next season.
Yep.
And we were able to provide them fantastic training facilities that would enable them to do that for the amount of time that they were prescribed to do that. They needed to play some matches, and we're fortunate enough to be able to provide them with 2 very competitive A-League teams that enable them to do that. Over and above that, I mean, really, they've come halfway around the world, and the reason that they want to do that is they want to engage and they want to talk to that fan base as much as physically possible. And there are so many different ways that you can do that. The open training session was a perfect example. And given the visitation that had come from international and interstate to see the games, it was logical that there were a lot of people in Sydney looking for something to do in the day in between. So it was a wonderful opportunity for them to be able to run that 5-hour player party and an open training session, and again just connect with 20,000 kids. I mean, there were a lot of kids here, but there were a lot of families here.
Yep.
There was a heap of social media, which is really good fun to see, where you're looking at 3 generations with grandpa bringing his son, who's got his son that are here, and all seeing the Gooners together for the first time.
So you're talking about connecting there. Stadiums and the technology around connectivity. Again, 2000. I think it was around 2010 when I first started talking to you guys around social and what we could do, and it was common around Australia. You get too many people, and the networks start bursting at the seams and those kind of things. How has the technological solutions and the connectivity in stadiums developed in your time?
Yeah, we're fortunate here. We started our journey with Telstra about 5 years ago on the Wi-Fi scenario, and we were fortunate enough to put in the Telstra technology in 2012. It's made the world of difference to us because people can actually engage in real time here, and not only are they doing it on the Wi-Fi network if they felt that way inclined, but it's also enabled the people who are less inclined to be on the Wi-Fi network to actually play on 3G and 4G. So all of a sudden we're finding that we do have a truly connected stadium. Different people have different needs through that process, and they're able to do it in whatever manner they feel more comfortable. And I think that's been a massive change for us over the course of the last 2 years, as that network's found its happy place, and each of our hirers uses it entirely differently. On a night like Arsenal, we were able to use some social activity through the screens and actually engage a little bit more so because slightly bigger budget, slightly bigger event presentation, and a one-off event without any sanction commitments. So we could have a little bit more fun through those platforms. So it's absolutely a part of the event experience here in Sydney, and all of our hirers are starting to really engage, and no doubt they're learning every day on how they might do it a little bit differently.
And it is very much the way of, how the hirers, how the clubs, how the promoters want to use it, because it is different for different venues. You might have a concert. I went to Jerry Seinfeld last night, and he's like, no phones, no cameras, no nothing. Yeah. You're even seeing some technology going the other way, where they're dampening mobile phone technology or putting them into bags. But it's now. Fans are getting to use it how they want it. All the networks are allowed to breathe a little bit, but everyone wants to take that. Hey, I'm at the game. I'm at there's a great try, or I'm watching Arsenal for the first time, and they're able to share it, whereas they couldn't. And now it's available. How do you manage There's so much tech now that's being thrown into the stadium space of we've got to have this, we've got to have this. How do you start balancing how much is too much, and how much is it improving the fan experience, or is it is it a slight incremental, and is that slight incremental really important?
I think 3 years ago there are a heap of different players in the space, unfortunately, and the stadiums they provide a platform for other people to be clever.
Yep.
And maybe 3 or 4 years ago, there was a little bit of an arm wrestle between the codes and the hirers and the broadcasters and the stadiums, who all knew that there was an aspiration to do something in this space. But there is a tendency to fall over yourselves unless you can actually find your happy space between all those different groups. So I think we as a stadium have taken a step back. We know that we've got a very important role to provide a platform. It's then incumbent upon our hirers, who are all come from different codes, to work out what that digital experience needs to look like. We've got a role to play. I mean, we own a ticketing operation, we own a food and beverage operation. We need to be able to add value to that process for our hirers. But I think we've got to the point where we know that it's not our job.
Yeah.
The person who owns the space is the hirer. They'll do that with a broadcaster and with a code. They need to own that digital event experience, and we need to supplement it as and when appropriate.
Yeah, and I think the whole the Wi-Fi as a utility of a stadium, again, if you go back a bit further, it was like, when's the Wi-Fi coming in? Who pays for it? That kind of that's the platform. Wi-Fi is seen as a utility, the same as bathrooms and food and those kind of and transport. As long as that's sorted, you that what you were just saying there about the platform. The things that can be added onto it, whether it's how their app works and AR and how it connects and those kind of things, that's something that you've got the platform there. The technology can sit on top of it, and it can be you can innovate on top of that.
Yeah, I think our role is to be the enabler rather than to set the scene as far as what that looks like. Because again, in dealing with so many different codes at so many different points of their digital journey, it's pointless us having a policy that takes them down a direction, because they've all got their own objectives, and they're all entirely differently sophisticated as far as how they're being implemented.
But having different hirers and content producers coming in and doing things from potentially other parts of the world and saying, "Oh, this is what we're going to do," it would be providing some sparks of inspiration that you're saying, "Oh, they did this at Bieber," or "This is what Adele did," and potentially some of those learnings or best practice can be brought across to other hirers?
Yeah, I think more and more that's happening. And I sat in some meetings with one code last week who actually wanted to talk about the event experience as it related to a concert, or as it related to Arsenal and what they did at Emirates. Because we were, I don't think anyone's silly enough to think that we know all of the answers out here. So we may as well go and pick the brains of the best in internationally, and we're very fortunate that we see most of them that come through Sydney and come through Australia. So we'd be completely mad not to want to suck that in and work out what the better ways to do things are. Arsenal most recently did some fantastic stuff in the precinct around trophies and selfies with legends, and it was a real eye opener because it was so simple.
Yep.
Everybody owns trophies and everyone's got legends. But to actually put all of them together, put them outside and see the buzz that created, as there was a line that went all the way down Olympic Boulevard to get your photo taken with Ray Parlour and the Invincibles trophy, we could do that in Australia every week with a different trophy under different circumstances.
Yep.
And it was great to be able to see someone bring that halfway across the world and see what sort of an impression it left.
So looking forward in the way that, you know, the stadium continues to evolve, both with who's coming in and the services that you're providing, what are you seeing in the future from an ANZ Stadium and then I guess the larger group that you're part of?
Yeah, we're fortunate enough that not only are we operating ANZ Stadium, but we're looking forward to January, February 2018 when we operate the new Perth Stadium, which is about to come online in Western Australia. And I think we'll certainly see an entirely different level of sophistication from a digital point of view.
Yep.
We're not fortunate enough here yet, being 17 years old, to have an IPTV system. Certainly when we go over to Perth, then there'll be some more little bells and whistles that we can have a play with. I think the great benefit of doing that in Perth as we move over to Perth is that the stakeholders have had the opportunity to see what's happened over here, and they're all working really well together.
Yep.
To come up with that event experience that transcends one group and actually complements the different groups together. And really looking forward to how that comes together, particularly with the AFL in the first instance in Perth, where you'll be looking at something where the AFL are working with the two clubs, are working with the stadium to actually produce one event experience, which might well be the first time, certainly on this side of the world, where we've been able to see that implemented, and that'll be good fun. Moving forward in Sydney, we're in the middle of some redevelopment considerations, and I would anticipate that here we're probably 3 years away from a stadium redeveloped and top class within the Southern Hemisphere, but certainly again we're in the fortunate position where we can learn a lot from what happens in Perth and bring that back home to the East Coast and see where we sit by about 2021.
Because that's the thing. I mean, that you'll be able to take, you know, the new Perth Stadium, you know, will have that flick of a switch. It goes from purple to blue and gold, and it will feel like a home ground to both of those teams, or whatever team or whatever concert that comes in. Yeah. It sort of validates all of that tech, and then you can come back and say, well, this is where I want to use it. So, you know, you've travelled the world like myself, looking at different stadiums and how they're adapting and how they're evolving. You know, not everyone can be opening a new stadium every year. You know, I've been lucky to go to stadiums like Levi Stadium and that are new and fresh, but then you've got, you know, for every Levi Stadium, you've got an AT&T Park that's been a leader for so long, and it continues to do that because it's constantly updating different parts of its stadium. You know, Madison Square Garden's the same. It's, you know, it's ancient in terms of stadiums, but the constant redevelopment and either rolling in different tech or different seating or different amenities keep changing the experience. So where do you look for inspiration from that space?
Yeah, I think it was really interesting last time I walked through MetLife, and it was 5 years ago now, and that was the first stadium that actually rang a bell with us, because they've got these two great hirers.
Yep.
And again, one's blue and one's green.
Yep. And
you start to press buttons and things change. And unfortunately, living in a stadium presently with 8 to 10 long-term tenants and no buttons to press,
yep,
there's a lot of manual labour that goes with trying to set this up as a home ground. And our NRL hirers in particular, the amount of effort that they put to turn this into Parramatta Stadium or South Stadium is commendable, based on the fact that it's all manual.
Yep.
One of the great joys for us as we move forward is actually working out how we can do that very efficiently for them and on a far more comprehensive basis than what we can do now. I mean, to walk into MetLife's merch store and see the button pressed and the Giants merch comes up because it's Giants Day, yep, we just felt jealous. Based on all of the activity that happens to see that happen in Sydney right now. So the opportunity, the efficiencies that go with that, and also the engagement opportunities that go with that for our clubs, most importantly, because again, we're just a platform,
yep,
that will enable them to do a far better job, far more efficiently in engaging their fans in 5 years' time. It's exciting.
Yeah, and that's the thing, that as the tech rolls out, the true white labelled stadium is a flick of a switch. And, you know, the same with, Air Canada Centre with the Raptors. It goes from purple to the blue and gold for Maple Leafs, and the whole experience changes, and it's sort of, and more of these teams, especially the long-term tenants, they want that home ground feeling that some teams that aren't in multi-purpose venues have, and that's the piece of their, they try to sort of tie into that identity piece.
Yeah, I think that's right, and particularly we just have such a unique set of circumstances where we might have 3 or 4 events over the course of a weekend.
Yeah.
And that's a heck of a lot of signage removal and installation and a heck of a lot of home team branding to be able to pull that off. And probably that comes to the detriment of the amount of work that you can do over the course of that period of time. So to be able to sit in front of 8 or 10 hirers in a few years' time and explain the efficiencies that go with being able to have your home ground on Saturday after someone else had it on Friday, that's a massive step forward, not only for us as a stadium and for our hirers as hirers, but for the fan, who most importantly just wants to turn up and see that they've got their red and green stadium because it's Rabbitohs Day.
So just to wrap up, what excites you about the stadium space?
I think the most exciting thing about the stadium space is turning up on a night like on Arsenal night and seeing 3 generations of fan who are sharing that live experience together.
Yeah.
If you can't get out of bed to see the smiles on the faces of the kids that are seeing the legends that they see on TV for the first time live, then you're probably in the wrong space. To be able to work with partners to deliver events like that, particularly when you're on an 18-month journey with someone like Arsenal, is something that's just a privilege to participate in. But similarly, I mean, at a local level, we've been working with the Rabbitohs in the NRL for a long period of time, from what was a pretty sad period in their very proud history, to be able to stand on the sideline as they won the NRL grand final about 4 years ago.
Yeah.
Was again exactly the same experience, and you've got 3 or 4 generations of people with tears in their eyes all sharing this live moment. I mean, at the end of the day, we all came to love sport because it was a live event. To play a small role in delivering that live event is an absolute privilege.
I do remember that day when the Rabbitohs did win, just to sort of be an outsider on the inside.
Yeah.
And see the welling up of tears and the joy and emotion. It is one of the lucky parts of working in the business. Yeah. Finishing with the closing 5, do you remember the first sports event you ever attended?
1981, first Illawarra Steelers premiership game at Wynn Stadium.
Oh, that one came back very quick. How old were you then?
I was 7.
And you've gone a lot of, now that you can either answer this from an ANZ Stadium point of view or an what's your favourite food at a sports event? Do you have a go-to food, or is there a place here that you find yourself going to, or do you just go to a staple?
I love a party pie.
There is a bit of that. What's the first app you open in the morning?
Twitter.
If there's someone that you think the podcast listeners should follow and see what they're doing, because you follow what they're doing, who would you suggest?
Troy Kirby.
Troy, fellow podcaster. Yes, definitely. I would second that. And if you were to have to pick a social media platform and say it's the MVP, either you can do it personally or from the stadium's point of view, what one would it be?
I'm actually loving Instagram at the moment, having seen the fun that we had during that Arsenal tour and the engagement. I would say Instagram.
And it is, from a stadium and a precinct point of view, it is the easiest one to see what's happening.
It just tells a great story very, very quickly, and it gets around the world as quickly as possible.
It does tell a great story. The only one that now I think, and I'm waiting to see where it pivots, to see where it goes, is the stuff that Snapchat have done with their Snap Maps. So whenever there's a big game, whether it's at ANZ or whether it's anywhere, you can now zoom in on the map and say, "Show me the snaps." And so you really are getting that fan point of view space. And again, I remember early on when the technology started coming and we're like,
we've got to block Periscope and we've got to block all these things. We can't have people filming the ground or the concert from a long way away. And now it's actually part of the story.
Yeah.
And it's sort of like it amplifies. It's like, I really should go to the Rabbitohs game, or I really should go to Adele. That crowd looks amazing. And so that freeing up of the shackles and letting people share is something that I think drives more people back into the live experience.
100%. Because, again, it's aspirational. You want people to say, hey, I'm here. How good is it? And just maybe that might mean that one of their friends comes with them next week.
Well, thank you very much for coming to the podcast. Where can people find you on the internet?
Twitter, Greg Sleigh, and Instagram, Greg Sleigh.
And I'll also put links in the show notes to connect with you on LinkedIn. So thank you very much for hosting me here in the suite at ANZ Stadium, and thanks for coming on the podcast.
Great to have you. See you soon.
Sign up for Sports Geek News at sportsgeekhq.com/sign up now.
Thanks again to Greg Sleigh. You can send him a tweet at Greg Sleigh, SLEIGH, just like Santa's sleigh. Greg Sleigh, send him a tweet. Tell him you've listened, especially if you've been to a game or an event. If you went to one of the concerts we did discuss, or you might be going to the monster trucks and the things like that are many events that are hosted out at ANZ Stadium, please send him a tweet. While this, I'll be actually in Vancouver when this podcast gets published. I'll be in Vancouver catching up with Lenny and Darshan and the team at Tradable Bits, working on a few things for Sports Geek campaigns, which are going well, helping sports teams understand how they could sell campaigns directly to their sponsors, both to attract the digital activation budget that's being spent. It's being spent in agency land, but also help them deliver better campaigns that don't suck. I think that might be a byline in the end. And also be talking to them about some secret messenger bot development. We've got a few messenger bots on the go at the minute to be launched soon. So if you're looking to get into the messenger bot space, or you want to improve the digital campaigns that you're developing and pushing out with your sponsors, as I've said I think once or twice before, the simple form will not do the trick anymore. The 25 words or less is something the fans will not enter, and you can't simply ask your digital team to repost to get more entries. There needs to be a little bit more sophistication, and that's where Sports Geek Campaigns comes in, helping your commercial team understand what they can sell and what they can't sell, pointing them in the right direction to sell what they can sell, and getting great results for your sponsors, but also some terrific data for your team from your social channels. So please, if you're interested in that, please send me an email, sean@sportsgeekhq.com, or simply just register at sportsgeekcampaigns.com. As I said, I'm in Vancouver at the minute doing a few things with the Tradable team, so you'll start seeing a little bit more content around that over the next couple of weeks. Stay tuned for the end of this. Thank you to Mark Cleary, a long-time listener of the podcast, and worked with Mark previously. He's doing the tour of Europe and hanging out in London, and was lucky enough to go to the first game of the Premier League season and see Arsenal. And so quite fitting, after talking about the Arsenal visit to ANZ Stadium, that we've got sounds of the game from Emirates when Arsenal did get up in the first game of the season. Thanks again, Mark, for sending that in. And as always, if you've pulled your phone out and recorded some video at a game, please send it in. Happy to use it for sounds of the game, and it's just another way for me to find out that you listen to the podcast, which I'm always trying to figure out. Until next episode, when I will be on my way back to Melbourne after being in Vancouver and then heading to Los Angeles for Podcast Movement. I'll be in Los Angeles later this week, so follow along. Podcast Movement 17, I think it'll be PM 17 or Pod Movement. Have to check what the hashtags are, but looking into the latest developments in the podcast scene and seeing how sports can better leverage podcasting. I'm loving what ESPN are doing in the space to widen the scope of what podcasts can be, and definitely introduce more sports fans to podcasting. Check out 30 for 30 podcast if you haven't already. Excellent production. and I think it opens up opportunities for both sports and athletes, teams as well, to get into the podcasting space. So follow me at Sean Callanan. I'll be tweeting along there. I'll also be doing my latest hack around conferences, which is using LinkedIn to let people know what sessions I'm attending, which works quite well because LinkedIn is currently favouring photos, which might be reason why you are seeing more of my photos on LinkedIn. If we're not connected on LinkedIn, my apologies. I should have already done that by now. But you can send me a connection and please say you listen to the podcast so I know that you're not just another random that's sending me an invite. Until next episode, my name is Sean Callanan, and you've been listening to the Sports Geek Podcast.
Join over 1,000 sports business executives in Sports Biz Slack. Go to sportsgeekhq.com/Slack.
Please leave a review on iTunes. Go to sportsgeekhq.com/iTunes.
Find out how to drive between $8,000 and $30,000 in profit for each digital campaign you sell sponsors. Check out sportsgeekcampaigns.com. Just like Jimmy Butler, you can call Sean anytime at 614-407-0407-200.